Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Florian Keusch and I'm the GORE 21 Program Chair. As such, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our first keynote speaker of this year's conference. We're extremely proud to have Mirta Galesic here with us today. She's joining us very early from her time zone in Santa Fe. She's professor at the Santa Fe Institute and also holds several external faculty positions, among others, at the Complexity Science Hub in Vienna and at the Vermont Complex Systems Center at the University of Vermont. Professor Galesic has a BA and a PhD in psychology from the University of Zagreb and a master's degree in survey methodology from the joint program in survey methodology at the University of Maryland. Before joining the Santa Fe Institute, she spent several years as a research scientist at the Center for Adaptive Behavior and Cognition at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin. In her research, she currently studies how simple cognitive mechanisms interact with social and psychological environments to produce similarly complex social phenomena. Her projects focus on developing empirically grounded computational models of social judgments, social learning, collective problem solving, and opinion dynamics. She's also interested in how people understand and cope with uncertainty and complexity inherent in many everyday decisions. She has published more than 75 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters and won numerous awards for her academic work. I want to single out one award here that is very special to us because she received the poster award at the 2002 GORE conference for a poster titled Effects of Questionnaire Length on Response Rate. Back then, she was still a student. So for those of you who are competing in this year's poster presentation and competition, I would say big shoes to fill, or maybe an outline for you what to expect in 19 years from today. You might also be invited to be a keynote speaker at our conference. But today she's going to talk about her current research on how election forecasts can be improved using Wisdomofcrowds questions. Again, welcome Mirta Galesic. We'll now hear her keynote. And while she's speaking, please post any questions you might have for Mirta in the chat window on the conference platform right next to where the video is running. And after her talk, we'll have time to discuss the questions with Mirta. And with that, we hope you all enjoy this keynote.
Hi, I'm Mirta Galesic with the Santa Fe Institute, and it is my great pleasure to present here at the German Online Research Conference. I have attended the conference many times over the years, and the knowledge I learned and the people I met helped me a great deal in my quest to understand human complex social systems. Online research, in particular online surveys, online experiments, have been one of my main tools in understanding the human complex social systems. And which brings me to the topic of my talk today, which is about election polls and polls in general, and how can the forecasts from these polls be improved using Wisdomofcrowds questions. This research has been done in collaboration with Wendy Brun-de-Bruun, Henrik Holston, and Dražen Prilac. I wish to thank them. We as social scientists aim, as one of our main aims, is to predict societal trends. We are probing this world around us using a variety of methods, and especially many of you are experts in conducting online research, online surveys, online experiments, collecting traces of online activity, such as shopping, social media, cell phone data, and so on. Still, we have to admit that some parts of the population are still remaining hidden to us, either because people are not online or they don't participate in polls. In any case, this lack of insight into some parts of the population is probably one of the main reasons why we still don't have a good grasp on societal trends. There were some mistakes in predicting recent elections in the US, the Brexit. We were unprepared to understand the extent of certain political protests against vaccination, the popularity of conspiracy theories, and so on. Here I would be suggesting that we can improve forecasts from survey research using questions about Wisdomofcrowds, and that we can harvest this Wisdomofcrowds by understanding people in two different ways, as social sensors and as forecasters. And then in addition, we can gain additional accuracy by combining these two perspectives. Let me start with people as social sensors. What do I mean? I mean that in surveys, Whereas we often ask people just about their own experiences. We can ask them to report about their immediate social surroundings. So in this way, we can get some information by proxy from the reports of these people about people who are otherwise not in these polls. This social sensing of understanding of our immediate social environment is actually essential in our everyday life. We need this. We need to understand who people around us are, what they think, how they behave, what they might plan to do to profit from social interactions, to establish good cooperative interactions, to understand who we must compete with and how, to engage in collective actions, group decisions, to find a mate, to understand who to learn from, to understand what the social norms are around us so that we can fit in better. However, the social sensing, which some would say is the key to the extraordinary success of our human species, has been neglected by researchers. Social sensing has not been harvested in typical surveys. Why is this neglect? I think that this is because there is this long-standing tradition of understanding social cognition is biased. If you Google social cognition, you'll immediately get lists of many, many often contradictory cognitive biases that we as humans supposedly have. We are accused to often feel better than everybody else, to feel that everybody else is like us, and so on. And indeed, in our own studies conducted, for example, in this case, on a representative sample of the Dutch population, we asked people to estimate probability distributions of different properties of the general population, such as household wealth, number of friends, work stress, and so on. These are these lines in blue. And when you compare them with the black lines, which are the actual population distributions, you see some systematic biases. It seems that when people are asked about populations that they don't have direct experience with, such as the general population, there are some of these apparent systematic biases. However, in the same study, we asked people to provide estimates of the same distributions in their social circles. And they tried to do that, and then we averaged these resulting distributions. And on average, these distributions tracked the actual population distributions quite well. So this gave us some hope that people can actually produce accurate estimates of their immediate social surroundings. And then this is actually old news. This has been done. In 1987, famous psychologists Nisbet and Kunda have found that University of Michigan students provided quite accurate probability distributions among their peers. This knowledge, however, has not been used further, has not been used in survey research. And some of it has been neglected in favor of this view of biases in social cognition. But these days, as psychologists, and I'm a psychologist, collaborate more and more with network scientists, with sociologists and other disciplines, and understanding the structure of social networks in which social cognition operates, we see more and more that it could be the case that that people have accurate social cognition for their immediate social environments, but the apparent biases occur because we neglect the bias of the social samples that people are receiving. Here we can compare these two networks on the left and the right, and they actually have the same percentage of blue people. But the person in the middle, our observer, who is also blue, in one case is surrounded by other blue people, and in the other is surrounded mostly by orange people. And so it could happen if we neglect this social network structure, that we accuse the person on the left to suffer from the false consensus bias, which is assumed to be a cognitive bias, and on the right of the apparent false uniqueness bias, which has also been described. When in fact, in both cases, the person is accurately reporting what she sees in the social environment. So which brings us to the idea that collecting the social sensing reports from a representative sample of the overall population could provide valuable insights in the overall population. Now let me proceed by showing an example of how we use social sensing to predict elections in different countries. In typical election polls, researchers ask about own voting intentions of participants. Typical questions are, if you were to vote in the election, which candidate would you choose? Or if you vote in the election, what is the % chance that you will vote for a particular candidate? The question is now, can social sensing improve election predictions? And here we are not asking about participants' own intention, but we are asking about their expectations about their immediate social environments, the so-called social circle question. which typically in our studies is something like this: of all your social contacts who are likely to vote, what percentage will vote for different candidates or different parties. And we define social contacts typically as friends, family, colleagues, and other acquaintances of 18 years of age or older that you have communicated with at least briefly within the last month, either face-to-face or otherwise. As long as the definition is stated, it can vary slightly depending on the context. So this is the social circle question. And now, how does it perform? First, let's look at the results from the 2016 US presidential election, which is the first time when we employed this question, on a large probabilistic national sample of Understanding America study. This is an online panel that has been collected by face-to-face and telephone recruitment. People who didn't have computers were given computers and online access, and they participate in various polls conducted by USC Dorsafe. In this poll, a few thousand participants were asked about their intentions to vote and also about the perceived intentions to vote of their friends in several survey waves. And so here we see results. On the x-axis, we have the survey wave. The larger the number, the closer it is to the election. This third wave is just the week before the election. The first wave is a couple of months before the election. On the y-axis, we have the absolute error of forecasts. So the larger is higher error, so it means that the lower line is better. The red line is the social circle, so the forecast based on the social circle question. The blue line is the prediction based on the own intention question. We see that the error of social circle is low already months before the election, and they only become similar just a week before the election. Furthermore, if you just look at people who answered both own intention and social circle question in all of these 3 waves before the election, then we see that the same people who report that they're going to vote for Clinton, this is the blue line, actually report that their social circles already in September will predominantly vote Trump. So we see this switch, which surprised many at the very end, showing already a month before the election in this social circle data. Of course, US example can be specific for many reasons. There are only 2 major parties. So we conducted also the same tests in several other multi-party systems in Europe. First in France in 2017, where we had a number of candidates competing in 2 rounds in these elections. And this is the results for the first round. Where we see that social circle predictions, this is the red line, is typically closer to the black line, which is the actual election results, than the blue line, which is the own intentions. And this is also reflected in the average error of estimates, which is higher for own intention estimates than for the social circles. The same, not shown here, is also we found better prediction based on the social circle in the second round of French election. Furthermore, in the Netherlands in 2017, we found also results that are positive for the social circle, except in this case here, the social circle estimates in most cases track the actual election results better, which is reflected in the smaller error for the social circle. And then finally, we also conducted this in Sweden in 2018, the same comparison, where again, the social circle question had a lower error overall for the election results than the own intention question. And finally, in the last 2 US elections, 2018 and 2020, social circle expectations here shown in yellow, were closer to the actual election result, the difference between Democrats and Republicans, in both 2018 and in 2020. So there were these social circle expectations were closer to the actual election results than the forecast based on the own intentions. We actually also investigated the usefulness of social sensing for predicting other societal trends, such as vaccination rates. I can briefly show that. So here we are trying to predict own vaccination rates by social circle vaccination rates in the previous season. On the x-axis, we have perceived social circle vaccination rates for flu in the season 2010-11. And on the y-axis, we have own flu vaccination rates in 2011-12. season, so the next season, and we've seen that the higher was perceived social circle flu vaccination rate in this previous season, the higher was the own propensity to vaccinate next season. And this is the case even when we correct for own past vaccination and sociodemographic. So especially when the social circle vaccination rate crosses this 50%, so becomes prevalent in the majority of the social circles, then we see that the own propensity to vaccinate increases quite a lot. Why is this human social sensing useful? Let's investigate 3 reasons for that. One is that people know that their social circles, well and can provide actual information about contacts not in the poll. And by averaging these local crowds on a large national representative sample, we can get a good glimpse into the overall population. And to dig in that a little bit deeper, we can see a couple of indicators for that from our recent research. One is that we find that indeed social circle samples are more representative by age and education than the participant sample. Here, the actual US population is shown in blue. The estimate of the percentage of different age categories is shown in black from own participant data, and the estimate from the social circle is shown in red. And you see that in most cases, the red line is closer to the blue line than the black line is, meaning that the reported social circles together actually form a more representative picture, a better picture of the overall US population for age and also in most cases for education. The related point is that social circle sample actually provides information about people who avoid or obstruct pollsters. And as you all have heard, in the US 2020 elections, this might have been a significant problem. The electorate is becoming more and more skeptical about pollsters. They refuse to participate for various reasons. According to our own estimates from our 2020 poll, around 10% of people were embarrassed when approached by pollsters and asked about either Biden or somewhat more for Trump. They feared harassment. They fear that their answers will be known to other people and that they could be harassed about their political preferences. And some even might have been obstructing the pollsters by reporting different preferences than they actually have. Now, how can we as social researchers get a glimpse into those hidden voters, if you wish? Well, again, we can ask people who are in the polls to try to report on their social circles, and in that way hope to get an idea about those who are not in the poll or who are obstructing their actual political preferences. And we see that from one indicator in a study. So we looked at participants who knew more such people and their social circle expectations, and compare them with people who knew fewer such people. Here on the x-axis, again, we have study ways. On the y-axis, again, we have error of social circle expectations. So this is like how much is anyone's individual social circle different from the overall population. The higher this error, the more it is different. Those shown in red here are people who report that they know a lot of people who would be embarrassed to report their true preferences or to fear harassment or to obstruct polls. Those shown in blue report that they know few such people. Actually, people who report that they know more of such kind of hidden voters also have social circle expectations that are closer to the actual election results, so the error is overall lower than all participants shown here in black, all the participants who only know a few such people. So this again is another piece of evidence suggesting that social circles reports or social sensing can provide insights into these hidden aspects of the population, some of which wish to remain intentionally hidden. What are some other factors besides this wisdom of local crowds that makes human social sensing useful in polls? An old social psychology finding is that people sometimes find it less embarrassing to admit that their friends are engaging in some socially sanctioned behavior than they themselves. And so it could be the case when we are dealing with when elections include a controversial candidate, that people find it less embarrassing to report that their friends are voting for this candidate than themselves. And indeed, our results from the United States suggest so. Typically, the difference between Democrats and Republicans, which in the last few elections were basically the choice between Trump and Democrats, this difference is typically lower and closer to the truth for the social circle expectations, the yellow bars, than for people's own reports about their own political intentions. However, this is not consistent over all political settings. We see this Party for Freedom in Netherlands, indeed, social circle reports provided a higher estimated percentage or closer to the truth for this kind of controversial party than own intentions. But in France and in Sweden, we get actually not that result or even somewhat opposite results. For example, for Le Pen, own intentions provided a higher estimated percentage of votes, and Swedish Democrats similarly projected to receive more votes based on the reports of own intentions. So we find somewhat contradictory evidence for this purported reason for the evidence for the usefulness of social sensing. Then the final reason why human social sensing might be useful has to do with the structure of social networks and how they influence people, how they influence people's own intentions. So one is that people around us actually over time might influence us. So even if at this moment we are different than most of our friends, because of the processes of social influence, it is possible that actually we are going to become more similar to our friends as the time goes by. And the other is friendship paradox. So let us look at the social evidence of social influence. We have some evidence from the social influence processes in the United States in 2016, where we were looking at how own intentions over time influence social circle reports, and in turn, how social circles over time influence own intentions. And for both Trump and Clinton voters, we see that how people answer, how people see their social circles today actually influences strongly their own intentions a month from now. And for Trump voters, we also see that own intentions influence the social circles, which we attribute to their ability to persuade, especially undecided voters, to vote in those elections. And also, this is some evidence for the social influence. And the other purported reason which we aim to explore more in further research is the friendship paradox. As you know, friendship paradox is this idea that on average, my friends have more friends than I do. And this is an inevitable property of any social network which has any variability in degree in the number of contacts people have. And so if on average, my friends have more friends than I do, this basically means that they are more embedded in the overall social networks than I am, and are both more likely to infect others and to be infected by novel beliefs and by viruses even. And so this has been, for example, used by Christakis and Fowler in a seminal study in 2010, where they were on an American campus interviewing both participants, randomly selected participants, and their friends. And basically, the reports of their friends helped to predict flu outbreak many days before the reports of actual randomly selected participants. In the same way, we think that for many societal trends, such as voting for new candidates, and embracing new beliefs, conspiracy theories, that actually asking about people's friends might help anticipate this. Might be an early detection system for noticing this emerging societal trends. Okay, enough about peoples as social sensors. Let me in a little bit shorter way tackle the other way in which we can harvest the wisdom of crowds in surveys, and this is by understanding peoples as forecasters. And here, we can again ask people about their social surroundings, but this time not about their immediate social circles, but about their forecast for the overall population. And so every person provides their estimates of the overall population, and we end up with an average estimate average forecast of everyone in the sample for the overall population. This is the classic Wisdomofcrowds approach. And this has been used in elections, election polls. For example, by asking people what percentage of all voters will vote for a particular candidate, or who do you think will win the election in many older surveys. Or in our recent study in the Netherlands, how many seats do you think each party will win in the coming general elections? These winner expectations have been often useful. They have been used in American elections over decades, and a relatively recent review of these results has shown that population expectations about who is going to win the election are as accurate or even more accurate than own intention polls. However, they're not always accurate. For example, in recent US elections, the same study that the same large nationally representative online panel has found, which predicted accurately actually that Trump will win, have found that people were expecting that Hillary will win with a large margin. The same panel in 2020 now suffers from the opposite error. So people now predicted that basically there will be a tie between Biden and Trump, when we know that there was 4 percentage points difference between them in the final election results. So these winner expectation results are not always accurate. And the question now is, how can we understand when are these winner expectations more or less accurate, and who in our sample is more likely to produce more accurate winner expectations? Now we can go back to the theoretical rationale for the whole human social sensor research. And it is this idea that people use actual information from their social circles to make inferences about broader environments. And so when they're trying to predict elections, an important source of information is what they see among their own social contacts. And so the question then lends itself is, could the structure of people's social circles affect their forecasting accuracy? And can we recognize people who are likely to be better forecasters by some structure of their social circles? But what structure, right? So we could look at homophily. What is the percent of one's social contacts that are the same as them in their political preferences? Or we can look at diversity, or if you wish, overall entropy of social circle distribution. And while they seem similar, they're actually not. Let me show you. So here on the left, we have a person who has highly homophilous social environments with a low diversity. And on the right, we have 2 examples of low homophily, but the one in the middle has also, again, low diversity. So everyone else is different in the same way from the person in the middle. Whereas on the right-hand side, we have low homophily and low diversity. And high diversity of everyone else everyone has a kind of somewhat different opinion. And it turns out in our research that this diversity of social circles, so measures the entropy of social circle distribution over different political preferences, is actually a good indicator of the absolute error of forecast about the elections that people give. People with moderate to high diversity, not super high, but moderate to high diversity of social circles give best forecasts. And that is the case, was the case both in the Netherlands and in the US 2018 election. And this holds after controlling for homophily, which actually has little influence, age, education, voting preferences, and also some indicators of effort, such as time spent in surveying. Okay, finally, let me talk about how we can combine the human social sensing and forecasting abilities. So we feel that both can be useful, and both contain somewhat different information. How can we combine them? So how can we use both what people tell us about their social circle and about the overall population? And this is something that the research is very fresh. We are in collaboration with Rajan Prelec. We are using the so-called Bayesian bootstrap method to create better, full information, we call them, election winner expectations. For that bootstrapping method, we first understand election winner expectation as a function of background evidence that people have about who might win the election, things coming from common sources, such as Twitter messages from famous politicians that we just can't avoid, or media that just everybody has access to, and various independently received evidence, so various more partisan outlets that we follow that are related to our own political preferences. So function of this background evidence and of private evidence, which consists of our own voting intention, what we know about ourselves, and what we know about our social circles. And so now we can formulate election winner expectations, which people also report in our surveys as a function of these own intentions and social circle expectations modified by these parameters A and B, identifying the common and independent part of the background evidence, and N, the size of the social circle relative to own experience. And we can estimate that using regressions based on the survey data that we collect, and then we can use those parameters to create a full information, or if you should bootstrap, a better version of election winner expectations that people have. And now we can look at how much we gain by using this full information, better version of election winner expectations. And we see that at least in the last 2 years election, we can get significant improvements in accuracy. So in both 2018 and in 2020, across different study waves, we see that this full information prediction, so which is basically a combination of these other sources of information, forecast the election better than these other forecasting methods. So here's where I'm ending. I hope I convinced you that in sum, we can elicit this Wisdomofcrowds using human social sensing and human forecasting, and that this can help improve our forecast of societal trends. And I invite you to read more about this in our recent publications, and also invite you to think more about further research that can be done on this issue. In particular, how can we further increase informational value of human social centers? How can we better sample them? How can we make better inferences from them? How can we encourage them to provide more truthful information? And how can we better understand how the structure of social networks, for example, the friendship paradox, affect the usefulness of Wisdomofcrowds for different societal trends? Another useful line of research is how we can combine this Wisdomofcrowds estimates with other data, both big data about online traces, for example, that people leave, machine forecasts, and so on. Another line of research is, can these kind of Wisdomofcrowds estimates that are based on relatively few well-selected participants, we can get quite good insights in the overall population, can be used in crisis situations when policymakers need to make fast decisions, when they need to understand the society quickly to help people, for example, after environmental catastrophes, to help manage political protests and so on. And the final is the interesting research question is how can we design citizen science platforms to help collect this Wisdomofcrowds data more pleasantly for participants and more quickly for social scientists. For example, for COVID-19, a number of online platforms have been collecting data about people's own symptoms, experienced symptoms of COVID-19 and their own protection behaviors. But very few, perhaps maybe one or two platforms were collecting data also about people's surroundings, very few were asking people, okay, what about symptoms among your friends and family, and what about different protection behaviors such as wearing masks or taking vaccination among your friends and family. And this could have been useful because, as we've seen from our previous data, it could help fill these gaps that we have in understanding our society. Thank you very much for listening. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I wish you to enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Mirta. We're back now live for everybody to ask questions for Mirta for her wonderful presentation. This was very inspiring, and I hope we all learned a lot about that. So again, I'm encouraging everybody to post questions into the chat box so that we can forward them here to Mirta and discuss them live with her. To get us started, I have, of course, prepared a couple of questions myself so that people have a chance to post or think about their own questions. So one of my first questions would be, so in a large theme over the last couple of years, over the last more than a decade here at CORE has always been representativeness and how representative are online surveys and how representative are non-probability surveys. And I think you mentioned in your keynote that still a key issue here for what you're doing is also to have a sample that's representative. So I was wondering whether you could comment a little bit on that, what role this plays in terms of the selection of people you invite to participate in these type of studies, and maybe you have comparisons of doing this in a probability and a non-probability setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I think I mentioned in my presentation, the social circle reports have a strong bias because, of course, we are naturally surrounded by people who are similar to us. So it is very important that the sample from which we elicit social circle reports is as representative as possible for the general population, ideally probabilistic, so that the biases in homophilies in social circles cancel out. And so then we can see the signal that is still there in the social circle reports, which tells us something maybe about people who are not included in the poll, or that can tell us something about how our own participants are going to be influenced in the future by their social circles. So we actually, our first attempt at trying out this question was when I was still in Germany. That was, I think, in 2013. And we were asking the question on a non-probability sample on a kind of haphazardly collected panel of participants that we had at Max Planck for some experiments and so. And so that sample was biased towards more younger, higher educated, more liberal people. And the bias in the social circle reports were even more biased in that direction. So you really need to have a diverse sample of participants to get these biases cancelled out.
Yeah, great, thanks. And maybe that's also somewhat related to this. So you mentioned that there's a couple of features of the social circle that play a role. So I was interested in also the size of the social circle. So are people who have larger social circles, are they the ones who are better sensors? I really like that you use the term sensor for people in a non-technical way. So I think this is interesting. So does the size play a role, or are even people who have a smaller social circle good in sensing what's going on around them and therefore are good predictors of these outcomes that you're looking at?
So we looked at it a little bit, but there is a problem in there is a methodological problem in our data, and that is that our measures of the social circle size are not that great. So So we use probabilistic national samples, which, as you know, are super expensive. And so we have, 2 minutes to ask everything that we want to ask if we are lucky. And so we just ask people, okay, what is the size of your, we have a definition of social circle. And so we ask them, okay, so with how many people you were in touch in this period. And so people give some number, from 0 to thousands. And that's not great, but still we try to correlate this with the accuracy of everybody's social, kind of how closely social circles correspond to the actual population. And we find a moderate correlation around 0.2 or so. And I think that here the issue is like in surveys in general, the size of the sample after a certain point doesn't matter. What matters is how the sample is constructed. So that it represents well the population of interest. And so if somebody has a large social circle, but everyone is like them, then it really doesn't contribute new information to our estimates. What we find is actually that people who are best in predicting elections are those who have a diverse sample of friends. So maybe not that much, not so big number of friends, but many very diverse ones, so from different parties. So those people are really best in predicting elections. And actually, if one could construct a sample of, if you wish, forecasters, then it seems, according to our data, that choosing people who have diverse social circles. By choosing them in that way, one could really capitalize on Wisdomofcrowds with a relatively small sample of people. One could just discard all of those. Most of us who are just surrounded by people similar to them.
Yeah, great. That's very interesting. And you mentioned this problem of measuring how big social circles are. I think this is a very, very interesting topic. And when you said this, I was just thinking about, right, our own research, thinking about like, okay, what even is a social contact, right? How do you measure that, right? What do people perceive as a social contact? I mean, you haven't mentioned this, and I don't know if you have looked into other ways of figuring out. So briefly at the break, we talked about digital trace data and things like that. Have you thought about other ways of gaining information about how engaged people are in their communities, either online or offline, and has that helped in any way?
That would be great. We so far did not use digital trace data, but it would be great if we could. I guess it would require additional investment in maybe ideally asking people to share some of their digital trace. But you're the expert, you know how that would work. But I'm sure they would certainly provide additional information about people's social contacts and additional information about people who might not be included in classical polls. So far, our definition of social circles was, pretty vague. I think I showed it on one slide. It was like friends, family, colleagues, and other acquaintances of 18 years of age or older who you communicate at least briefly, either face-to-face or otherwise. And as you can see, I mean, this is a pretty vague definition. It includes many things. And I guess what we are trying to capture is more like a kind of general idea, general impression that people have about people around them, rather than exact count. I think it's impossible to ask, okay, now exactly remember 100 of your friends and tell us for each one what I think. We just really are looking for some holistic impression in general. And of course, depending on people's attention and how they are construing the question, they will focus on different parts of the social circle, and all of that contributes some noise, hopefully not too much bias in our estimates. But definitely combining the digital trace data, I think that's the way to go. And then another thing is I'm talking a little bit about this human social sensing ideas, or using more people's reports about their environments to not only predict elections, but also try to understand, predict the development of other societal trends, belief, vaccination intentions, various cultural trends, and also the spread of disease. Like, I think in one slide I showed that this kind of social sensing, if you wish, has been used by some sociologists to try to predict spread of influenza on a campus by not asking people themselves, but asking their friends about it, because our friends have more friends than we have, and so their more central position allows us to sense these trends. Anyhow, so coming back to the digital trace data, so far we were contacting the social sensors in surveys, which, as you know, is expensive, is slow. Can we somehow design digital ways of harvesting this wisdom of crowds, some ways to engage people in some kind of citizen science platforms where they would be able to report in some way in what they see around them? Of course, without revealing anybody's identity or not spying, but kind of giving this impression of what they see in their immediate environment. So how can we, and you are the expert again for gamification, right? How can we gamify these reports so that we can get them kind of faster and more pleasant for people? Because answering these questions is not pleasant for people. They hate it. They can do it, but it's difficult.
Yeah. Thanks. There's tons of great ideas here that pop up in my mind. So, but I see that people are posting questions now in the chat. So excellent. Thank you. Keep sending us questions here. Birgit Jeske asks, do you find different wisdom strengths for heavy social media users?
That's a good question. And you see, we never asked that question. I wouldn't even know. Let me see if in any. No, we didn't. That's a great idea. Actually, we didn't specifically ask this question, but in our studies in the US, which we did on this Understanding America study panel, which is a big panel of 5,000 people or so, that participate in many of their surveys, I guess they probably have some data about the social media habits, and it would be interesting to see whether those who are more active are actually also better predictors. That's a good idea. And actually, you can investigate it yourself if you wish, because all of their data is online. You can download it from their website, from their 50 different surveys, I think including ours, and if it's not, I'm happy to share. And then using the IDs of the participants, otherwise completely anonymous, you can then investigate these different connections.
Excellent. So we have more questions. Karina Konesse asked, would it make sense to give a higher weight to online panel respondents who report having non-internet users in their social circles to decrease potential remaining bias regarding internet use in the data?
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing we didn't investigate. It's really, really good idea. Yeah. We didn't think of that in the last panel, in the last American elections, where we actually had some funding. We asked a few more questions about the characteristics of the social circles that people were reporting on, because before we were only asking about election intention, voting intentions of the social circles. But now we had a little bit more time to ask about gender, age, education, and some other political, societal attitudes of these social contacts. And we generally see that people who have more diverse social circles, not only by voting intentions, which I showed in presentation, but also by gender, age, and some societal other attitudes, are closer to the actual national truth. But we did not ask about internet use, which is something to look in the future. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Great. Then we have a question by Chintan Turakia. People tend to socialize with people of similar ideology. Did you study that, and how do you resolve this potential bias of estimate? So that probably is related to what you just said, right?
Mm-hmm. Hi, Chintan. By the way, I don't know if you remember, but when I was a student at JPSM, we were working with you a lot on, collecting data. You were there working with us on data collection for our experiments. So that was great. Hope you're well. Yeah, no, absolutely. There is a strong homophily bias in social circle reports. And this is why it is important to collect these reports from probability, ideally probability, or at least, nice representative samples. Actually, our survey in France, which I briefly showed, I think also in Sweden, were actually quota samples. So, it was not probabilistic, but at least it was kind of representative for the nation, for the national population. And then the these homophily biases cancel out. And so what is remaining, well, that's our speculation, is the additional signal in the social circle reports that is not present in own reports. And this is the signal about people who are not in the survey sample, signal about possible social influence in the future, signal about people who are more central in the society overall because of the friendship paradox, and who might be more kind of indicative of future trends and where the society is going to go. And so, yeah, you're right. And I think that's why probabilistic sample is important.
Yeah. So I still see a lot of praise for your keynote here. So people really liked it. So that's great. If people want to share more questions, please feel free to do so. In the meantime, I have another question here. So you mentioned this briefly, that your definition of the social context and the example you showed said, I believe, face-to-face and otherwise. And I was wondering whether you want to briefly speculate or can say something about how this has changed over the last year, now that we have less face-to-face interaction, right? Most of our interactions, as we have an example here right now, are via video, right? So people are less face-to-face interacting. Does that play a role, do you think, in the way you measure? Or have you adapted your measures for that? Maybe you can comment on that briefly.
Yeah. No, yeah, we were also thinking about it, especially last year in 2020 US elections, because of COVID. Of course, people's face-to-face interactions reduced significantly, especially their face-to-face contact with acquaintances such as at work and so on. And they were more oriented on either their immediate, family members, maybe closest friends, and then on self-selected online contacts. So, and so we did not adjust our methods, but we were afraid that social circle question will not work in 2020 as well because of this part of information basically being lost. But still it worked out. At least it worked out better than the unintentional questions. But it's interesting, I think it's an interesting question, something to study, whether actually the homophily in social circles as measured by us, and we have it now in several years, whether it actually increased in the times of COVID, or what happened, because now we can just basically self-select so many of the information, so many of online contacts we actually have, we are in touch with. Yeah,
great.
Something to study.
Yeah, good. We have more questions coming in, and I'm pretty sure you know that person too. Timo Lenzner asked.
Hey, Timo.
Great talk. Thank you, Mirta. Do you think Wisdom of Crowds questions lend themselves to other survey topics as well? Maybe this is a new questionnaire design paradigm.
Thank you, Timo. That's kind. Yeah, good to see you virtually. Great work we did together on eye tracking and all that. That was great. Yeah, we hope so. We definitely hope so. I mean, so kind of the general premise of this work is that people are well attuned to their immediate social environments. And this kind of goes in contrast with traditional social psychology, I would say, which if you Google social cognition or cognition, you get these lists of enormous amounts of biases, and it seems that the kind of the general idea is that people are too biased to be useful as social sensors. But we think that because of it's so important for us to fit with others, to collaborate with others, to know who are the cooperation partners, who we can trust, who we cannot trust, that we really kind of have a relatively good idea, like people who we communicate with, not only who they are going to vote for, but what they think of various issues, what they like, what they don't like, what are the social norms in our environments, how they feel, how they look, how much they earn. So many of, so I think that this information can be harvested definitely to study other societal trends. And we already did it for vaccination intentions, and we find that the perceived vaccination rates in social circles explain next year vaccination over and above own vaccination intentions. But I think there is practically no limit in what you can ask people about others. I mean, of course, and we know it from some other studies where we actually asked about different other critical social circles, not in the context of elections. But some people think some things people know better than others, like marital fights. You usually don't know so much about others, but you know things like their education level or income. So obviously, some properties are more visible than others. But there are so many. So I would say that this question certainly should be added to the toolbox and used more often.
Yeah, and then there's a follow-up question, kind of like that you almost answered with your last comment, whether there's types of questions or topics where you think this is not going to work, right? And if I understand you correctly, this is like where you think people have a hard time basically seeing into others.
Right, right. So any kind of, very private things, mental health, sexuality, these kind of things that you don't talk about to the broadest number of people, that could be more difficult to capitalize on social circle reports. I mean, on the other hand, times are changing, right? There are many online communities, people discuss all kinds of things. So I think this really is an empirical question to understand it. One important thing is to have in mind is also this friendship paradox that I touched on briefly, and that is now, it has been discovered decades ago and described by sociologists, of course. But now, in the last few years, there is a growing number of papers, again, also by computer scientists and so on, studying more how the friendship paradox emerges and what are the different aspects of it and how it can skew the results that we see by looking at these more central members, by friends of friends. And so for some characteristics, such as, those beliefs or even disease, if you wish, that where the more central members of the society are both more likely to catch it early and to spread it to others, these friends of friends, our friends, can be good early indicators of what is going to happen. But for example, for some other things where the centrality of this position is related to things like personality traits. For example, they're probably more extroverted, people with more friends. Then using social circle reports to estimate extroversion in the general population, I would suspect would produce biased results. It would not be a good indicator because friendship paradox here works in the other way. So these are some kind of things that I think we are still kind of discovering and want to learn more in the future.
Yeah, great. And since this question came from Timo, I had to think about whether there's room for cognitive interviews to better understand, right?
Absolutely.
How this works better, right? And how people come up with these estimates, right? So
definitely, Timo, please let's work on it. But and also, there is a lot of room for just social network analysis and a kind of mathematical analysis of what does it mean to be more central in the network and how different properties then spread or are related to the position in the network. And can we say something more rigorously, if you wish, than just empirically trying out different things and seeing what it works? That's a challenge, I see.
Yeah, great. So we have room for about one more question. So I'm looking at the chat to see whether someone is posting something. Maybe in the meantime, you can briefly mention, do you think this is the implementation of these type of questions, if I'm not mistaken, is not that complicated, right? It's not that you need a super fancy way of asking this type of questions. So in theory, it should be relatively easy to implement that in a survey, right?
Absolutely. So basically the format is, so what % of your friends will vote for this or that candidate or party? So in German context, it would be, okay, think of all of your social contacts that you were in touch with some, you need to construct it relative to the local context and time. And then say, okay, what % would vote for a different party? And as I said, that's certainly a little bit more difficult than just saying who you are going to vote for. But it doesn't take more than a minute for people to say it. It's just that, many people will say, oh, I really don't know. But if you press, one thing that we learned from a study in the Netherlands, I think, it's if we allow a don't know answer, many people will say don't know. But actually, if we don't allow it, we still get useful information. It seems that people do have some impression, but somehow they don't believe that they do. So there's that. It's can be a little bit, maybe a little bit challenging, but it's definitely something that can be done in a minute. So it can be asked.
Yeah, so I think it's a call actually for people who are currently doing polling in Germany. There's still a couple of weeks left, right? So it would be interesting to compare this to the standard questions that are currently asked. So
definitely.
This would really be a call to action here. So I see we are already at the end of the time. This was so wonderful talking to you. That time flew by. Mirta, thanks so much again for doing this. Thank you for
inviting me. Again, I'm so excited to be here, and I remember my early days at Gore, and all the push I got from just being there, talking to my idols, learning about more interesting research, getting their support, and establishing so many productive collaborations to this day. So thank you, Gore.
Thank you so much. Good. With that, we're closing the keynote session here. I invite everybody to join us again in 10 minutes for our final session this afternoon, and then we hope to see you all at the Gore Social Party in the evening. Again, Mirta, thank you so much. Take care, and hopefully to see you at a Gore conference in the future in person again.
Let's hope. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.